All right. Hello, hello, and welcome to Congressional Black Caucus ALC, but we're doing it Black Millennials for Flint style. I am so excited to open up episode 1 of season 3 of Green Table Talk in partnership with our phenomenal partners with the Environmental Defense Fund, as well as the Climate Action Campaign, and of course with our favorite Corazon Latino. I am LaTricea Adams, founder, CEO, and president of Black Millennials for Flint, and I'm a new face today. We're excited to have our co-host Wawa that will be coming in to support us, but standing in for her today. It's a lot of activity going on the Hill in our nation's capital, and we got caught in a little bit of traffic, but we're still going to keep it moving for our sis. And I would be remiss if I did not introduce our co-host for this episode, Ms. Karina Martinez.
Hi, everyone. It's great to see you all here. My name is Karina Martinez. I'm the Director of Communications for Corazon Latino, and we're an organization that really strives to connect people with nature and advance social justice through those types of movements.
Right, so we're ready to go ahead and get things started and introduce you to a dope group of women. So today's theme, of course, is all about women because it's all about women. We run the world, bringing in Beyonce, all that energy. So today's theme is The Future is Female, focused on Black and Brown EJ warriors. When we think about the historical context and even current surrounding environmental justice, women have definitely been on the forefront. And so for our conversation today, we will focus on an intergenerational and multicultural focus on the work surrounding environmental justice, where we are, and the future, which is female, with where we're going with environment. So with that, I'm going to kick it to Karina to open us up with our first question for these dope brown and black girl magic ladies between us today.
One quick little second. Before we do start, I want to just take the time to acknowledge our brothers and sisters who have been impacted by recent extreme weather events. We know that Hurricane Fiona and Hurricane Ian are really causing devastating impacts on the lives and environments of people around us. So just want to acknowledge them. People are friends in Puerto Rico, Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and Florida as well. So on that note, climate change is not a hoax. We have people in power who continue to deny climate change and create this narrative that it doesn't exist. We're seeing it right now. Hurricane Ian was Category 4, striking Florida, and we have to talk about white men's role in this as well. We're seeing an alarming pattern still today where there's just this they're failing to acknowledge that climate change exists. So we are seeing an element of white supremacy mixed with conspiracy theories and disinformation as we continue to battle these extreme weather events. And quick story here is we recently had a young female climate activist and environmental justice warrior known as Climate Auntie Raya Saltar, and she was verbally assaulted by Representative Clay Higgins. I'd love to say it was a surprise, from Louisiana's 3rd District during a House hearing. So as she was pleading about the impact of the fossil fuel industry on the climate crisis, these actions are really taken to silence constituents and to really push on their own narrative instead of hearing from people who are impacted. But shout out to our Representative Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez for standing up to Rep. Higgins, and calling him out for the misogyny, and lying to their constituents. It's shameless. It really is. So we have a lot on our plate right now, so I'm just really grateful for the people who are with us today, these panelists and all of you activists who are out there really fighting for not just our environments, but the people who are most impacted when things go wrong. So for each of these panelists, as a starting question, as women in the environmental justice space, what have been some of the gender-specific challenges that you faced, and also how have you overcome them?
Happy to start. Sadly, the biggest gender-specific challenges that I've overcome was the birth of my children. I was in leadership positions in the federal government, and two separate male bosses at two different federal agencies called into question my ability to do my job after the pregnancies. This is within the last 10 years. This wasn't like 20 or so years ago. And they called into question my ability. And what did I learn from that experience? I'll tell you what I learned. Is the thing that my parents had always taught me as an African American. You have to be twice as good and work twice as hard to be considered half as good. And it is a really unfortunate reality that we still face today. And so how do I overcome that reality? I'll tell you how I overcome that reality. For those two men, there were also hundreds of other men within those organizations who were huge champions and supporters. And so I tell everyone, go find the coalition of the willing. Go find those men. Find the people who have your back and build a coalition that cannot be diminished by someone else's insecurities.
I think very similarly to that, my biggest gender-specific challenge that I faced is just being told that my truth isn't valid, that what I'm experiencing isn't real. I am a social justice advocate for the Flint community, the Flint area, Genesee County area, and as many of you know, as you watched it played out on TV, folks were denied their truth for years. Prior to the Flint water crisis being televised, being nationalized, being put on social media, there were folks on the ground in the city of Flint saying that something was wrong for years. There are still people who are suffering from the impact of the Flint water crisis. And so, but what folks don't know is a lot of those first people who were on the forefront of this issue were women. They were women who were told that they were crazy, that they were hormonal, that they were dealing with gender-specific issues. And I think that is compounded by the fact that I'm a young woman as well, and a black woman as well. And so there are all of these different barriers and obstacles that have been created by this society and the systems within that are generations formed, right? And so now as a 21-year-old coming in and having a voice and using my voice, people are taken aback by that. It's fearful, for folks. And they should be scared, honestly. And so how do I overcome that? I overcome that by continuing to use my voice and continuing to advocate for the communities that are underserved by our government and that are ignored by folks in power. And not only that, but I encourage other women of my age to also use their voices in the ways that matter, by voting, by writing letters, in any way, by protesting. And I think it's important to acknowledge that it's important for folks to advocate in the way that makes most sense for them. And so, yeah, that's how I overcome that challenge, by continuing to overcome and continuing to use my voice, because I know that my reality is true and it is valid and it is justifiable because the data shows it.
Oh, my God, how do I match that? It's so incredible. I think it's so important to remember that we come from communities of over-extraction, right? And that makes us very complex individuals. The most gendered specific challenge that I've faced, and it's going to get personal because we're humans, right? My father got very sick a few years ago. He was the sole provider in our family. I'm a first-generation Mexican-American. He was the sole provider in our family. And I get emotional because no one really understands what it's like, as Margot mentioned, to take care of a family member, right, who is sick. And because we are women, we are expected to pick up that lift, right? And we're expected to pick up that lift in the family, but also deliver in the workplace and be because I come from a frontline community and I am an educated frontline community member, I am asked to be part of different, boards within, community boards within my community, to speak up for groups, to speak up for my communities at different city and state level events, right? And I think that is really challenging and taxing on the bodies, but what has been very helpful for me is to form a community of allies, right? And really identify who is it that you are, who is it that you don't have to be the voice of everything, right? You don't have to split yourself in 1,000 pieces, because there are people who are equally as qualified and that you can bring in, that you can open the door for other people. And I think that is what brings me so much hope and light in all of that is happening. It's how we are creating our network and then bringing them in to be representative, training them to be really the voice of the community of our.
I'm trying not to. We just got started. This is question one. I'm trying to keep my feelings together. But something I would be out of order. I don't think that we did a full acknowledgement of our panel. If we can, before we go and transition into this next question, and I want to say thank you so much for being candid and vulnerable in this space, because y'all preached to somebody today, and I'm really grateful to have that sisterhood among us. That really resonated with me, Esther. I literally was doing a text exchange, and folks have been asking, sis, we are in CBC. What are you heading to, this week? I'm tired, right? And I think, that is, the consistent theme of Black and brown women. And I'm like, you know what? My ancestors fought too hard for that to be my narrative. And my new narrative is I'm resting. Not I'm tired. I'm going to shift that culture for myself and start saying I'm tired. I'm resting, because that's what people fought for me to be able to. Thank you so much for sharing that. But before we transition to this next question, if we can start with the illustrious Margot and just do a brief introduction so that our viewers can know all about your Black and brown girl magic, and then we'll tap into this next question.
My name is Margot Brown, and I'm the Vice President for Justice and Equity at the Environmental Defense Fund. I've been at that organization for almost 2 years now, and before there, I spent almost 14 years with the federal government at NIH and the Environmental Protection Agency. I hold a Master's of Public Health and a Doctor of Science from Tulane University in Toxicology and Risk Assessment.
I really need to catch myself and say, Doctor Margot Brown, and put some respect on your name. That part. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. My name is Kayla Shannon. I am currently a junior at the illustrious Spelman College, #1 HBCU for 16 years in a row. Just had to say that. Majoring in political science, and I also serve in several capacities in both for-profit and nonprofit agencies in Genesee County. And today I am serving in the capacity as an intern for the Flint Public Health Youth Academy.
Oh, yeah. So my name is Esther, and I have various hats, but I lead our diverse partner initiatives at the Environmental Defense Fund, where I bring in groups, untraditional social justice groups, and try to figure out how to support them in their environmental journey, which they don't need much supporting because they're already doing incredible work. And I have a master's in environmental science and a bachelor's in environmental science and economics.
So smart and dynamic and excellent. So great to be in this space. So transitioning a little bit to this next question, we're going to get real with this question. So first, last year in October, we celebrated 30 years of the environmental justice movement. The first convening happened in Washington, D.C., very historic, literally where the movement really was solidified. I would be remiss not to recognize Warren County is where we're going to always honor, where we saw the first organizing around the environmental justice movement in Warren County in North Carolina. But it was in 30 years ago here in the district where the 17 principles of environmental justice were founded. Now, 30 years past that, we have really started to see a different approach with the definition of environmental justice and environmentalism. So, for example, we're starting to see a lot of social media influencers and celebrities that are not necessarily uplifting things that are representative of environmental justice. So, for example, we're going to keep it real. We see a lot of corporations where we see capitalism being integrated into quote-unquote sustainability initiatives, which is what we call greenwashing. Greenwashing is a form of advertising and marketing in which green PR and green marketing are deceptively used to persuade the public that an organization's products and policies are environmentally friendly. We see it all over the place. We see it in fast fashion. We see it in beauty products that are actually sometimes lies. We see it in a myriad of things. So as we think about, we're combating some new territory where we're combating issues that we see on the ground that are impacting public health, like we see in from the results of Hurricane Fiona, what we see in Flint, Michigan, which we see in water quality right here in our nation's capital. For any other panelists, how can we counter this growing occurrence of greenwashing and really focus on the true aspects of real environmental justice work? That was a big one. Anybody can start.
Yeah, I think for me it's holding ourselves and corporations accountable to what they claim to support. So not necessarily, yes, calling them out to say that, like, this is capitalist, this is BS, right? Like, you're not being truthful in your practices. Your practices don't reflect what you claim to support. But I think not only saying, holding them accountable, but saying, but if you do want to support, here are a myriad of ways that you can actually put your money where your mouth is, right? And so it's holding them accountable to not just have the PR stunt, to not just put the label on their product, to not just to make these claims across social media, right? But it's to actually support the people on the ground level who are on the ground running the streets, trying to create actual change. So I think that's how we counter, we hold them accountable for what they say and what they claim to support. And I think we also, on what we can do, though, is continue to uplift and push to the forefront folks who are truly doing the work, which is what we're doing right here, right now, is having transparent conversations about what's truly occurring throughout our nation in the environmental justice sphere. So we hold corporations accountable, but then we also continue to uplift those who are genuinely doing the work.
Real pause. We have the phenomenal Wawa that has entered into the building. Sis, if you can join us and you can assume your seat as this co-host, I'm so excited to see you, and we can go ahead and keep moving with these questions. But I definitely wanted to honor you in this space. This is safe space. This is sisterhood. So come on, sis.
Hi,
welcome. You look so pretty. We're gonna switch places.
Sorry, y'all. I was coming from Maryland. I was in the Uber for an hour and 30 minutes, so I'm so excited to be here with everyone. Yeah. So
I'm glad you made it.
Yes,
Welcome back. Yes, that
Wawa,
you're
introduce yourself.
Hey, so my name is Wawa, and I'm the co-host of Green Table Talks, and I'm an environmental justice activist, and I'm the founder of Black Girl Environmentalist. So just really excited to just be in all of y'all's presence and Black and brown women around the world. So.
Yeah, I'm glad you're here. And yeah, I agree with what you said. I also think that this system thrives on ambiguity. So I would encourage people to just ask questions. If you do not understand something, ask. Like, what does that mean? Ask anyways, because people who know the answers like to be asked questions because they know that will give them a different, maybe there's something they haven't thought about, a different angle of looking at a problem. And your question will help inform their thinking, right? And when people are hesitant to give you an answer, I would continue to press, right? Because that is when you know there's something that is wrong or is off. And that is what greenwashing thrives on. I think it's ambiguity. So I would recommend to just continue to ask questions, even when you think everyone knows the answer to it. People don't, because we're really building this ship as we go. And that is what is so exciting about this transition, that we are all active participants in this space and can have a role to play.
I would have to agree with my co-panelist here. We have got to hold people accountable. Anybody who's ridden the Washington, D.C. Metro, they always say, when you see something, say something. When you see people who are greenwashing, call it out. Call it out immediately and call it out publicly. We have to hold people accountable. And it starts with each one of us. When we see something, we say something. The second thing that we have to do is we've got to control the narrative. How do we control the narrative? These two ladies here are controlling the narrative. The five of us this evening are controlling the narrative. One of the best examples that I've seen of a woman of color in this space who controls the narrative, as we lovingly refer to one another as our work wives, is my colleague at EDF, Vice President of Community Engagement, Heather McTier-Tony. Heather does a masterful job of doing two things. She comes loaded with facts, and the second thing she is able to do is to speak people. So not only is she coming with scientific facts, but she's speaking to people in a way that they can understand and it resonates with them. The best example that I can give of this is a few weeks ago during the Jackson water crisis, Heather recorded a video for TikTok. That video got 70,000 views and was picked up by the Weather Channel and played in full. She controlled the narrative. That presentation has resulted in a reoccurring spot on the Weather Channel, their pattern show. I mean, that's amazing how she is controlling the narrative. And I would be remiss not to do a shameless plug for my work wife. And I'm not going to mess this up, so you have to allow me to read here. I've written a book, and it's called When the Street Lights Come On, Black America's Call for Climate Solutions. She is controlling the narrative.
And I just want to add to that because I think that's so valid, and I love the shameless plug. I love a shameless plug for the sis. But I think in that same line of thought, we also have to use the same channels that mis and disinformation are being used for in order to provide accurate information. I did a panel actually during the COVID pandemic talking to medical professionals at U of M Ann Arbor about how to communicate to young people medical information in a time where, as we all know, there was so much mis and disinformation being spread across social media. And so what I love about that is that she used a TikTok. And it's the things that we overlook in these fields, like I cannot say that it isn't valuable to have the interpersonal conversations, because it absolutely is. But if we want to be realistic about the impact and how impact is made in our society today, a lot of it is via social media. A lot of it is on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, these things that people frequent. That's where the accurate information has to be. That's where we have to tap into, because those are the sources that our enemies, so to speak, or the people that we're working against, those are the channels that they're using to get mis and disinformation to people.
I would also add that for people who are not as tech savvy or like to be out there as much, having conversations with one another is really transformative, right? Really learning what other people are thinking, how they're processing, what issues they're facing, and how to be listening. I think that is in itself very, very powerful too. Having those deep conversations with your neighbors, with the people that you work with the people that are on the street, that you're riding with. I think that is very, very important, and that's going to get us a long way too.
Thank you all for sharing. I think our call to action then is let's get loud.
Yeah.
Let's do this. Transitioning over, so after winning the 2020 election, yes, President Biden won the 2020 election, the Biden administration committed to creating 10 million green jobs in the U.S. So that's a phenomenal commitment. But LinkedIn still found out that the share of female green talent, even though it's grown since 2015, it lags behind male green talent. So over the last 6 years, 66% of transitions into green jobs have been made by men. Staggering. Dr. Margot, as an environmental health expert and scholar, toxicologist, and environmental justice advocate, how could this administration and the green sector at large be more intentional with inclusivity towards women?
Thank you. That's an excellent question. The first thing the federal government can do is implement their own policy. A lot of people may not be aware, but the federal government has a policy where they are, I don't want to say required, but they're supposed to hire or contract to small businesses and small businesses that are run by women. So let's start with making sure that when the federal government is making decisions around green technologies, that they are seeking out, women-owned businesses. That's I think the first and biggest thing that the federal government can do. I think the second thing that the federal government and other Greens can do is really understanding where the voids are in STEM. Right now in STEM education, women make up about 45% of folks who are pursuing STEM degrees. However, when we look at engineering, that number is only 21%, and it is 19% for computer science. And so we only have 27% of women engaged in STEM careers right now. We should be addressing this from an educational perspective as well, because if the future is female, which I think we all agree on, if the future is female, it is imperative that we develop pipelines and educational opportunities for women to step into STEM and to step in a way that they will be supported and held up when they get in that space. So, there's also a lot of amazing work that's going on that we should be uplifting. There is the Women's Earth Alliance, and they have helped coordinate with, environmental campaigns in 24 countries and lifted up 15,000 women. So I think I always say it's an all-hands-on-deck approach. Government can uphold what they're already required to do around women contracts. The second thing that we could do is improve our educational systems. And the third thing that we can do is create awareness around women organizations that are already leading in this front.
Such an important point to make as well. We know there's countless research that's been done that shows that when you uplift women and girls, society will benefit overall. And I think oftentimes we don't take the time to really discuss why that is. And that's because women have the unique expertise of experiencing these issues firsthand and therefore creating solutions as a means of survival, which leads into this next question, I think, perfectly. So I think we all can agree that the Flint water crisis was one of the most devastating man-made acts of environmental violence in our lifetime, and it's an ongoing one. While there was a major focus on the impacts of the crisis on women, on children birthing people and women were particularly vulnerable as it relates to reproductive and maternal health. Kayla, from your experiences on the ground, how can we invest more in environmental health education, particularly for young women and girls, and why is that so crucial in the fight to achieve environmental justice?
What a question. I think there are so many different ways to invest in education, but I think what must happen before we even begin investing in environmental education for young women and girls is we have to empower them to even be willing to use that information once they get it. Because so many young women are socialized to believe that regardless of how much information that they have, that they're powerless, right? That we live in a system that no matter how hard you work, no matter how much you know, that you're always going to be 10 steps behind whatever man has half the information as you do. And so I think even prior to beginning to educate young women of color especially, I think we have to empower young women that your voice matters, right? And that this education that you're receiving is important because you have the ability to impact the world. It's not just, so over the summer I worked with the Flint Freedom Schools Collaborative, and I had the opportunity to impact young brown children between 4th through 8th grade. I was a site coordinator, shout out to my kids. And I think one of the most beautiful things about that experience is you get to watch young people come in the door shy and meek, and then over the course of the summer program, they leave confident and clear in their abilities. They leave clear knowing that they can make an impact on their community, that they can make an impact on themselves, that they can make an impact on their country, the world, and that is so integrally important, because it doesn't matter how much you teach someone if they're going to keep the information to themselves. What does it matter that you educate someone if they're afraid and they feel helpless? So I think before we even begin educating young women, which is so important, we have to empower them to be able to use that information. But then after we've empowered them, we give them the access to accurate information, right? We let them know what's going on in the world around them, and then I think after that, you empower them to take the next step, to have a call to action of how you personally can impact your community using this information. Because the access that we have to information right now is more than we ever have. Like, Google is a click away. I laugh all the time because I have a 7-year-old and a 10-year-old younger sisters. And I remember being their age and always being told, like, if I had a question, look at the dictionary, and now they can just Google it. And I'm like, do you understand the privilege that you have, that you can just Google things? So I don't even necessarily think that the struggle is the access to information, so much so as it is that, one, folks aren't empowered to actually use it, and that once they have it, they don't know what to do with it. Like, where do I even go from here? I have this education, I have this information, but do I believe that I can actually impact change in my community? And if I do believe that, then where do I start? Where do I start? How do I make this information my own? And so I think that's I think more so, not more so than the education, but equally as important is empowering. Also figuring out where they fit in, figuring out what your lane is, because we're not all we weren't all created the same. And so whereas I may be comfortable sitting on a panel like this, and this might be my lane, someone else's lane might be a blog. Someone else's lane might just be organizing in their community. Someone else's lane might be creating a club. It might be creating resources for folks. It might be having those conversations that you were talking about. And so I think, as I said, it's important to educate young women, but I think equally as important it is to empower them and to help them find their lane of what they can do with that information once they've received it.
I love it. We just got a one-on-one on how to empower women. That was great, Kayla. Thank you so much. And I know that you've also mentioned, that as Black and brown women, we have different types of challenges as well. So I want to bring up one of those challenges includes colorism as well, too, and we haven't gotten the solutions that it deserves so far. And just as an example, as we're thinking about Puerto Rico, it was hit by Hurricane Maria and 5 years ago, and it's still not recovered, and then now Fiona. And a lot of the majority African and indigenous community members got hit the hardest by this extreme weather event, but they're invisible. They're invisible in the reporting. They're invisible. Their work that they've been accomplishing, their environmental work is also invisible. And so we want to fight back against that invisibility of Afro-Latinx and indigenous-led organizations and people, and acknowledge the work that they've put on for decades to defend nature and to mitigate climate change as well. So I think we have to take these factors into consideration and also work harder to really uplift these people as well. And Esther, we know that you do a lot of work with tons of different groups. Like you said, you're bringing people together all the time. And in your work as an environmental justice advocate, how do you tackle anti-Blackness, anti-Indigenous practices, and what advice would you give to other environmental justice warriors?
Wow, you guys are just throwing fireballs.
I know.
It's such an important question, and it's an unfortunate reality in our community, and it has a history, right? It comes from a history of colonialism, and we have always been pitted against one another in a fight for survival, right? And that has allowed the system that we have now to thrive. And to me, it is such I can't even imagine it, right? Because I grew up in a household, as I mentioned, my dad was the sole provider of our family. We never had abundance, but we had enough, right? And whenever we had enough, so whenever someone would come in and cook, and if we had an unexpected visitor, my mom would somehow magically make it work. So we would have food for everyone, and that is so beautiful to me. And maybe I'm operating out of a system of idealism, but then I think about younger generations, right? And how I see them bringing each other up together. And I think that is what is really special and what gives me the most hope about what is happening now, and how we can fight this in the future. It's that we are operating out of a place of abundance and not scarcity.
Wow, I feel like LaTricea and I went into this deep conversation last night until 2 a.m. Talking about this. Yeah, about how we really need to demand also from the people in power that they don't lay these types of scarcity situations on us as well. So, yeah, thank you so much for love this, working in abundance together.
I'm going to pivot a little bit to the policy end of things. So obviously there's intersections between all of what we're talking about. So for those of us that were in D.C. or in the DMV this past month, we saw a lot of folks head over to the White House in celebration of the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. However, there's been a lot of conversation in the environmental justice community as to how it works to serve Black and Brown communities, and rightfully so, specifically in regards to funding allocation and unclear dynamics of exactly where it's going to be going for EJ communities, as well as fossil fuel investments. So in light of all these conversations of the good and bad of the IRA, I'd love to have insight from each of you as to what your call to action to this current administration would be, including federal agencies, to improve equitable access to resources and communicating that to frontline communities that perhaps need to know the most about funding allocation, and in regards to transparency in general around environmental justice, funding, and resources.
I can. Oh.
No, please.
I've been thinking about this because, and I wanted to pivot off of Margot's point earlier. But making it easier, making the hiring process easier for federal agencies, for people, for our communities is so important. If you go to USA Jobs, it is so complicated. They want to know everything about your work history, and then they have a mechanism. I recommend that they have hubs in frontline communities where they can hire people from the community and make it an easy, streamlined process where people can go and ask questions. What is it like working here? How can we make it easier? Because the current system that we have only benefits people who have worked in the system before, have family who's gone through the system before, and we need to open up those opportunities, and we open them up by creating easier employment pathways.
I think for me, and this sort of goes back to what I was speaking about earlier in the conversations that we've had, it's requesting that the government, and more specifically the Biden administration, put their money where their mouth is. His administration benefited greatly from votes from folks of color and women. And yet, in these conversations, now that he's in office, not rarely, but outside of the public spectacle of being able to benefit and talk about the platform of communities of color and marginalized communities, you don't see him taking the action to ensure that those communities are prioritized in the policy actions that his administration is taking. And so I think that's the first thing, is just is prioritizing the communities that he prioritized when he was on his election cycle, and speaking to those communities. And I think that's the second part of it, is going out into there are so many, obviously, there are so many professionals in our communities that have the information, and they don't ask. They don't ask. They sit in their bubble and they communicate with one another about these issues that they have no concept of, because they're so far removed from real experiences as a citizen that like, how could you create an equitable solution? You have no idea what equity looks like. Like, you have no concept of equity. And so I think that's the second part, is one, prioritizing the communities that you marketed yourself to, but then two, having the conversation, leaving the White House, leaving the caucus to have conversations with the people who are at the ground level, who are experiencing these injustices, who need access to these resources, and who you claim to be in support of, who you claim to be advocating for.
Well, I'm going to take two parts of this question. I'm going to break it down. The first thing I want to talk about is the science behind a lot of the proposals. As we talk about CCS, as we talk about green hydrogen, as we talk about all of these, quote, silver bullets, we need to make sure, and the Biden administration needs to make sure, that these silver bullets are not achieved off of the backs of black and brown people like they have been for the entire history of this nation. That's number one. And number two, the second thing that they can do is follow the money. Let me say that again. They can follow the money. What happened during COVID? We had billions of dollars that were misspent that we will never get back. More than $80 billion and unemployment claims are gone. There's another $150 billion that is not accounted for or was misappropriated. We're talking almost $250 billion was misplaced during COVID. Under the IRA, we have a tremendous opportunity and responsibility to hold the Biden administration accountable. They need to follow the money, and they need to make sure that the dollars are going to black and brown communities, and that we're not doing, as we've discussed in this panel, greenwashing or giving the money to someone else who sort of is EJ adjacent, because that is a real problem right now, as you know. Because so much money has hit the street, guess what? Everybody does EJ. 3 years ago, you couldn't spell the letters EJ. Couldn't spell them. Could not put E and J together in a sentence. But today, guess what? We do EJ at our company. No, you don't. Biden administration, follow the money.
I got to clap for that. Yes. Follow the money. Yes. Yeah. And you do that we've never seen this amount of money before. Agencies are not prepared for the amount of money that is coming down, and then one, how to allocate it, and two, how to track it. That is why we need to build up those agencies with people from our community so that they can ask those questions. They can say, hey, wait, what is that? Tell me more about that, right? But if we don't have people in our interest asking those questions, it's...
Yeah, and I just want to add one more point here about we're really seeing a lot of trickle-down money coming through too, and this money needs to be coming to our communities, to black and brown-led organizations, and not get filtered through other hands before it gets to us. So, still, talking a little bit more about policies and promises. Back in December 2021, the Biden-Harris administration made a 10-year commitment to replace all lead service lines and adequately address lead paint in housing. We know how detrimental that is to people's health. And while this is a monumental commitment, it's still unclear what role women will play in this decade-long project. So to each of our panelists, what roles do you think women should play in creating lead-free communities?
Well, I'd like to, before we talk about what role they can play, I'd like to just reflect on the role that they have already played. Women have played a tremendous role in creating lead-free communities. if you look at some of the best work that's come out of academia, it was led by women. I had the opportunity at the Office of Children's Health Protection to work under women who were leading that office and leading the President's task force on environmental and health and safety risks to children. Women have been at the forefront of the lead crisis for a very, very long time. One of the things that we can do moving forward is uplift our sisters who are community leaders. Oftentimes, we undervalue the lived experience of people in communities. And I'd love to share with you a really powerful example. When I was a graduate student at Tulane University, my advisor was a white woman, and she was given money from the CDC to work on housing projects in New Orleans. And she knew her lane. And she knew that she could not go into those communities and get taken seriously. And she created a program called the Lead Busters. And what she did was she hired women with lived experience from those communities to educate and train folks in the community about how to treat lead paint. And it was incredibly successful. And I think that there are so many models like that one that we can use today to really amplify what the Biden administration should be doing. So when we think about leadership, I just implore everyone to think about an entire strata of leadership, and it's not just the person who's running the EPA's Office of Children's Health Protection, but it's the women from the Ivoryville projects in Louisiana who can be real leaders and making change.
Yeah, and I think in that same line of thought, I think women can continue to do what we've always done, which is organize before we get permission to do so. I think sometimes folks are waiting for the resources. They're waiting for the say-so. They're waiting for permission, so to speak. They're waiting for someone to tell them that you're an expert, that you're good enough and you have enough information to be considered an expert in this field. And what I love and experienced firsthand with the Flint water crisis is there were women that came together and didn't wait for somebody to give them permission to say that something was going on. They didn't wait for someone to tell them that their opinions were justifiable. Because why? Because they were experiencing it. Because they were seeing it, because their children were experiencing it, and they were unwilling to let another day go by where the administration would tell them that what they were experiencing wasn't real. And so I think that's the role that women continue to play, because we've always played that role in being the glue. And I think we can continue to come together and work in these spaces without necessarily having the plan, because that's what we do best. We are able to build structures and planes as we fly, so to speak.
Yeah, I would say, I agree. We have been doing this work for a really, really long time. And the women of color love their families, right? And they want to see them thrive. And when we see injustice, we want to speak out against the injustice, and we have, right? It is are people willing to listen to our struggle when we go to the schools, when we go to city council, and we say, hey, this is what we're seeing? Or is our reality being, distorted? It's like, oh, no, you don't have lead. Like, give us tests that say that you have lead, right? And then we go to a doctor, and the doctor won't take our suggestions for lead testing, right? So willingness to listen, and then if you are in a position of power, I would ask for that perspective, right? I would say, hey, have you consulted with X community? Bring me this community, right? And then we are encouraging people to go out there and find it and look for it and listen to it. Because we're already out there and we're already doing the work. Now it's just about how do we uplift them.
So I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but this fabulous conversation is coming to an end. And I think for those of us that are here in person, to people who are tuning in online, I think we all feel really energized from being able to learn and hear from you all. And I would love to know if there's a call to action that you have for folks that are gathering here for CBC, people that are just interested in learning more from Black and brown women who run the world and are doing the thing. So I'd love to hear from each of you. What do you like the audience to take away from this conversation?
I think if you take nothing else, and what I want everyone to know, really irregardless of their race or gender, or ethnicity or sexual orientation, et cetera, is that your voice and your experience matters. And one of the things that we learn about at Spelman that was an important slogan of the feminist movement is that the personal is political, right? And so there's this idea that, like, I have to get here first. Like, I have to have this degree. I have to look this way. I have to be poised. I have to have it together. I have to know the words. And I implore you to jump before you even see the falling ground, to take the next step, even if you don't know where it's leading, because your experience is unlike that of anyone else's, and your perspective is so unique to you. And without your voice, there's no way for us to gain access to the depth of information that your brain has access to. And so I think, if nothing else, I implore everyone, and most especially Black and brown women who are so often silenced and erased in these conversations, to use your voice and to understand that your experience is an intellect in and of itself.
I would say to connect with people you wouldn't necessarily connect with, right? I think the climate movement is going to take ideas that are outside of the box, things that we haven't thought about before, and that's going to take us connecting with others who we wouldn't necessarily talk to. So go talk to someone very random and open yourself up to that opportunity of collaborating on a project.
My call to action is always the same. It's one word: vote. We are all sitting in this room right now having a discussion about the IRA. Why? Because Black and brown women showed up and showed out in November of 2020. And that is why we are here. I implore everyone to vote, and not just to vote, every 2 years or in a presidential election. Your local elections are actually far more important to your health and well-being and the well-being of your family. You should vote in every single election. And also, consider running for office. To the point of my other panelists here, there's nothing stopping you from running for office. You can do it today. But I encourage everyone to vote. We've got an election in November. You know what? Don't just vote. Bring 5 friends and family members with you, because we are going to need every single vote if we want to protect the climate.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for being here. Let's get loud, and let's get loud with our voices, and let's get loud with our vote.
Oh, I like these chairs. I got comfortable.